For Nanaimo-North Caution? Yes. Please continue.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is indeed my pleasure to rise to second the motion that we, His Majesty's most dutiful and loyal subjects, the Legislative Assembly of British Columbia in session assembled, beg leave to thank Your Honour for the gracious speech which Your Honour has addressed to us at the beginning or at the opening of the present session. Thank you, Madam Speaker, and welcome to the Chair. It is my pleasure indeed to speak in this House, and it always is. It's an honour to second this motion. It's the first time I've done this in the 18 years that I've been here, and I'm very thankful for that honour. I'm very thankful for Her Honour for delivering the speech and giving the acknowledgements that she did, and her particular acknowledgement to the Indigenous peoples that we represent. And in my case, I'd like to acknowledge that the constituency I represent encompasses the traditional territories of the Cowichan, the Penelakut, the Halalt, the Nanaimo, the Sunimis, and the Layaxan First Nations. And it is indeed an honour and always a privilege to operate in their territory, to live and build a life as all my constituents do. I'd also like to thank my sweetheart Leanne for her endearing support and her enduring support, as we all know the challenges that we face in this job, and they're not always just in terms of time. It's a stressful place to exist, and we do hope for better things for our constituents, but I think our constituents hope for a better tone from their leadership, and I think this House endeavours to deliver that, and I will do that myself today, Madam Speaker. I'd also like to give special thanks to the member from Langford-Wandafuka for his service as the Premier of British Columbia. My friend, if I may, John Horgan, has been a long and deep influence in my life, and his friendship has been so important to me. But watching him take on the role of Premier and become so endearingly attached to the people of the province, to my constituents, it was something remarkable to witness. And I look forward to the same sort of experience with the new Premier. And I thank him for his appointment of myself in the Parliamentary Secretary of Force role to continue that important work. And with thanks, I acknowledge that. Madam Speaker, the throne speech is about hope, it's about vision, it's about what the plan might be. It's about new realities, and there are so many new realities that we face since the pandemic, the challenges in the world that we live in. They're all so great and so enormous. I think to my constituents and the services they give to each other, the dedication of constituents that we represent to our communities. I think of some of those who have been recognized this past year from my constituency, or indeed some who have passed. One of those people who has been recognized is Nanaimo singer Lauren Spencer Smith, who was recently nominated twice for Juno Awards. Douglas White III, who is the former chief of the Nanaimo First Nation and is now an advisor in the Premier's office for his excellent work with the First Nations Justice Council. I'd like to recognize Carlo Rush from Cowichan and Jackson Fryer from Nanaimo. They together make up Funkanometry, a dance duo who were semi-finalists in America's Got Talent. And if anybody wants to see some amazing movement, you just have to Google Funkanometry. I'd like to thank my friend Joel Allen Canfield and his partner Melissa Griswold, who every day traverse the streets of Nanaimo, encouraging not only good ambassadorship, but good citizenship as they pick up and clean up the city as an effort that is completely generated and directed by themselves. I'd like to honour Mayor Al Sebring, who retired this year, did not run in the past election. He and I have very differing views politically, but I have an enormous sense of respect for Al. He was always dedicated to his constituents. He represented his council without fail in the tone and way that he needed to as a leader, and he was a wonderful person to work with. I love Al, and I'll miss him dearly as he's moved back to Alberta to be closer to family. I'd like to recognize Larry Matten, the Director of Instruction for Cowichan School District. He was a finalist in the Premier's Award for Excellence in Education. Larry is someone who was an excellent teacher and a leader, particularly working with kids who were struggling. When I became a school trustee, and you can imagine how long ago that was, since this is my 18th year in this house. And then sadly, I'd like to recognize my dear friend Maureen Young, who was regional director in Nanaimo, who passed away this year. Maureen had a grace and a beauty that was unparalleled in the world, let alone in politics. She was so modest and so honest and generous to her community, multi-generational family from South Wellington, a coal mining family. She was a real a leader by example and an absolutely wonderful person, a great loss to the community. I'd like to recognize Craig Evans, an activist in food security, who is struggling with health now at this time, and let him know that my love goes out to him, and the community appreciates so deeply the contributions that he's made for many years. I'd like to recognize Sandra Zuccolini-Larocque and Mike Larocque, who together with several other people championed the restoration of Morden Colliery Historic Park, which is an important recognition of the history of Vancouver Island, both its difficult colonial history, its important place in the labor history of the province, and its contextual foundation stone of what it is to be a Mid-Islander. I'd like to thank the other mayors that I have the pleasure of working with, Mayor Aaron Stone of Ladysmith, Mayor Rob Douglas of North Cowichan, Mayor Leonard Krogh of Nanaimo. They all know how I feel about them, and I have a great respect for each one of them. Madam Speaker, we have different roles. As MLAs, we represent our community, we seek to bring benefit, we seek to represent challenges in this House. Excuse me. And then in our caucuses, we have different roles in government. In opposition, we have different roles. Particularly mine in the government is as Parliamentary Secretary for Forests. The Premier has appointed me to that role and asked me to chair a Forest Worker Support and Community Resilience Council, which is taking essentially $85 million worth of programming and shaping it, helping, we hope, to shape it in ways that will make it more relevant, efficient, and have a greater effect, positive effect in our communities throughout the province. Because as we know, the challenges in different communities, even when it comes to the same issue, are quite different, whether the community is close to retraining opportunities in colleges or universities, or whether they're remote and depend on each other more than institutions. We have to make sure that our impact in all of those communities is seeking an equitable outcome for the constituents we all represent. I think really we were asked in question period some questions, and one of them contained a statement, and the statement was that doing things over and over and expecting change is illogical. It was the Leader of our Opposition who supposed that. And I agree with him. I agree with him. And that is why this government is not doing things the way they were done before. That is why, when it comes to housing, we are not letting development run amok without any check, without any effort to have outcomes for those who are more vulnerable match in any remote way the outcomes for those who have wealth. Those are the important things that we know our constituents need us to pay attention to. The Leader of the Opposition also suggested that government just get out of the way. And I think, Madam Speaker, there are moments when government certainly can find a way to allow things to happen as they might. But I believe that most of our constituents expect government to be a partner, to collaborate with community, to collaborate with them in reaching the best outcomes possible. And it would be naive and, in fact, reckless for us to consider that this place has no effective role in both our economy, our society, and our communities. Just look at the purchasing power of government. Just look at the annual activity of every function of government and how that has such a deep impact, how it is, in fact, something that this province must and should lever to the advantage of the people that we represent. And it's only through collaboration, and it's only through a government being involved in people's lives in a way that suits their needs that those things can happen. And so I think the last thing that people would want government to adopt as a general philosophy would be simply vacating the stage, exit stage right. We've had that. We've had that. Not doing things the same, doing them differently means no more tax cuts paid by service cuts. No more tax cuts for the wealthy paid by service cuts to the rest of us. That's what it means to be active. That's what it means to do things differently. It means that we give credit where credit is due. It means that we recognize that the incredible performance of the British Columbia economy, the recovery in our schools, the recovery in institutions is not because of government. It is because of the people of BC, empowered by a government that in fact is their backstop and in fact is supporting what communities want, desire, and demand. That, I think, is doing things differently than what we've become used to in this province. Doing things differently is an authentic commitment to reconciliation. And I'm not making a partisan stab at a difference there. I acknowledge previous Premier Campbell's efforts at reconciliation. I think that was the best aspect of that previous government. We are continuing that and trying to build on that in ways that have been described here, supporting housing in First Nations communities, the delegation of child and family protection to service agencies in Indigenous communities. So many efforts, Madam Speaker, Indigenous leadership in forestry, policy planning and development and implementation. There are so many examples of how reconciliation continues to be the North Star of our government, but also I think, Madam Speaker, the purpose, the purpose of this province, the central purpose is to correct what has happened and build on the partnership that stands before us. I look to the Cowichan First Nation. When I was elected, and that's a long time ago, so the ages might have changed a bit, but 70% of Cowichan First Nations were under 25 years old. There's this enormous capacity that's in these communities that is just waiting for a partnership that is truly ready to empower this development. And that's exciting. It means that this province is on the cusp of a new time, not a past time, not rooted in the past, but centered on what is the indelible and unavoidable future of this province. The future of this province lies through reconciliation. The future access to the land lies through reconciliation. The future access to work and economy in this province, it lies through reconciliation. But most importantly, our future commitment to justice, equity, and peace lies through reconciliation. And I commend all British Columbians who have collectively embraced that value and principle as the guiding energy of our province right now. And with that as our engine, we cannot avoid but be successful as a province. I'm encouraged as I look around the constituency I represent, and I see efforts to build a new reality. When I grew up in the Cowichan Valley, practically every day we could smell the pulp mill in Crofton some 20 kilometers away. I know the industry has so much more it needs to do to become in any true way sustainable. But so much has been done since those days, Madam Speaker. Now, I don't think I've smelled the pulp mill in at least 15 years. When I was elected, the now Catalyst pulp mill was bragging that they were somewhere around 70% less water use intensive than they had been in the past. Now that's above 90%. The scrubbing of the emissions has come to the point where they're taking machines built in 1957 and bringing them to today's standards in terms of their footprint. Yes, there's so much more to do, and there is a legacy that we have to deal with. There are polluted beaches with shellfish that can't be harvested by neighboring First Nations. There are scars on the landscape from land use decisions that were poorly thought out or really not considered in any way, certainly not in terms of their cumulative impact. But we have to point and give credit where credit is due, credit to ourselves as a province for the commitments we've made to change the way we do business, the way we govern ourselves, the way we work together. This province is leading this country in so many ways, and those are the ways that match up with the principles of the people that I believe I represent. And I feel very, very confident about that and very reassured. I'm also looking to the throne speech, and one of the first sentences was that noted that your government's plans to tackle big challenges and build a stronger, more secure future for everyone who calls this beautiful province home. We live in divisive times. We live in times where surely some of our neighbors are pointing to other neighbors and saying, well, it's their fault. Pointing to people who were their neighbors but now struggle and live on the street and calling it their fault. These are not the path to solution. This province, in order to dig ourselves out of those challenges, will need to exercise the greatest depth of empathy we can all muster to support each other, just to support each other through these crises that challenge our hospitals, our legal systems, our housing. All of these things can only be solved if we work in collaboration with one another, as the Premier so often points out. You know, Madam Speaker, I turn now to point out some of the things that have been done in my own constituency over the past year or several years. Right now, that same Crofton mill is undergoing some intensive renovations so that they will, after they're complete, use less fiber, use less natural gas to heat their boilers, thereby reducing their emissions and reducing their demand on the fiber base of our forests. They will turn to cardboard recycling as a source of fiber, combined with their own pulp and some wood fiber from the industry byproducts to create food packaging. Excuse me. And other forms of recyclable packaging. This is an answer to demand. This is done in collaboration. This is done in response to demands by our very constituents who say, we don't want to use single-use plastic. We want a solution. This is a way for us to rebuild the social contract for the industry in this province, but also answer some of the demands that the world is placing on us and that we must rise to. I can point to investments in In my constituency in housing, we have in Nanaimo to the Cowichan Valley, 1,500 units of affordable housing, and at least 260 more that are in the planning stages. In Nanaimo, there have been 1,317 units of new affordable housing for seniors, families, and people experiencing homelessness. This has been an enormous addition to our communities, and it has had a big impact. In Cowichan Valley, there have been 233 units of affordable and supportive housing built. In healthcare, Madam Speaker, in Nanaimo, over $50 million has been invested in improving healthcare services, and that includes major electrical upgrades to the Nanaimo Regional General Hospital, new MRI equipment, a new intensive care unit for Nanaimo Regional General Hospital, a new urgent care clinic for Nanaimo, a new nurse practitioner clinic, a new and upgraded heart health clinic, and a new wellness and recovery center. This is all in Nanaimo, Madam Speaker. In Cowichan, we've invested over $10 million into improving healthcare services. And when it comes to homelessness and street disorder, the challenges that our communities face, this is a very hot topic, obviously. You know, when I first became an MLA, I was a housing critic, and you know, I remember thinking about the homelessness problem, and we had a growing issue in the Cowichan Valley, and the essential answer was to encourage our community to be empathetic and to see that how many of us indeed are just a few paychecks away from homelessness ourselves, or a head injury away, or the loss of a relationship, or any number of reasons that people end up on the street. So it was by encouraging constituents to see that these are our neighbors, these are our brothers, these are our sisters, these are the people we love. We were able to address the problem, I think, before it became entrenched. And thankfully, at that time, there was a little less blaming of the people who were on the sidewalks. And I encourage every British Columbian, every person that I represent, to reach deeply into themselves to find the most empathetic response they can to people who struggle. I had an experience at the legislature here in 2006 where a gentleman collapsed on the grounds, and he was obviously struggling. He was homeless, bearded and not clean, and he required CPR, and he survived, but a week later died. I heard from that man's family afterwards, and they told, I actually received a picture of him with his niece. He was in a Montreal Canadiens sweater, and he was clean shaven. He was an IT professional making a six-figure salary, and he was essentially the surrogate father to his niece. And I'm not surrogate, but he was the uncle who was there. But then he wasn't there. It was because of the loss of a relationship, and he had tragedy in his life, so he ended up separated from his family, sitting on the curb outside this building, and they didn't know where he was. And when I pulled his shirt open, he had tattoos of Looney Tune figures on his chest, like Tweety Bird and Sylvester the Cat and all of them. And so, and it really struck me, you know, the innocence or gentleness of that. And then to find out that, you know, he had been separated from his family, and he was loved, but he was sitting on the curb, dirty and unshaven and lost. And so I encourage everyone to see that, In every case with people who struggle in our communities, there's a story. And it usually is a story of trauma, of loss, of some kind of challenge that has broken someone's capacity. And not to point a finger, and not to say that that person is a problem. That person has a problem, but they are not a problem. They are a citizen of British Columbia, and they deserve every respect that this chamber could possibly offer them, perhaps more than any British Columbian. So I believe that the efforts that our government is making to support people, to invest in people, to show people that when they stand up, there's someone standing beside them and ready to walk forward with them in collaboration. That's the spirit of the government that I feel I'm representing. You know, I also think, this is not part of my notes, but I also think that, you know, we've had so much division when it comes to management of our resources and our land base, and how we deal with the challenges of the industries that operate on our land base versus other values. And the best examples have been those of collaboration. Again, you know, to echo the Premier's constant reminder to all of us in our caucus that the path forward is through collaboration and consensus building. That it's unfortunate that we've come to the place we have, but I think that the policies that we're attempting to implement, led by First Nations in this province, will in the end rebuild a sense amongst British Columbians, one that I've had all my life, that felt this province is so graced with so many incredible assets, and they have been poorly managed. The fish, the air, the land, the water, the trees. They've been, complex rules of international trade and various policies have grown around all of these entangled issues. And to make fundamental or substantive change becomes an incredibly complex and difficult thing to manage. It takes creative policy making. I look towards bills that this government passed that restored the ability of the forest minister to act in the public interest. That seems an obvious requirement, and yet it required legislation in order to achieve that and in order to restore that, so that indeed the management of tree farm license, the exchange of those, could be done with the public interest being a component of that decision. And that's an important, really important shift. I look to my own constituency for the fundamental issues of reconciliation and Indigenous relations, and I know that there have been 2 historic agreements with the Nanaimo, including the transfer of 3,000 hectares of Crown land. We recently signed an agreement with Cowichan First Nations, which includes Cowichan tribes, Halalt First Nation, Liaxin First Nation, Penelakut tribe, and Sunimis First Nation. These are agreements that are empowering those communities to work in partnership with others in the region to establish economy, services, and relationships. And those are what are the foundations of a strong and healthy community. In forests, just in my own constituency, this government has invested $23 million to help transition mills and the pulp and paper industry, as I indicated before. That's the Crofton project that I spoke of. The government has invested over $10 million to expand protected parks in our community. They funded close to $3 million in watershed and wetlands restoration projects in the constituency I represent. The government has provided $3 million to expand composting facilities in the Nanaimo region. The government has provided $1.4 million for restoration work at the Morden Colliery Historic Provincial Park. I mentioned in my credit to my friends from Nanaimo, Sandra Zuccolini-Larocque and Mike Larocque. In education, since forming government, this government in Nanaimo-North Cowichan alone has invested over $150 million in our schools. That includes $31 million in maintenance, upgrades, and classroom expansions, $34.7 million in seismic upgrades, $79.9 million for the new Cowichan High School, which is well underway and looks to be a fantastic building. $10.9 million in COVID and restart funding. 5 new accessible playgrounds have been built in Nanaimo-North Cowichan. 3 new electric school buses, and that is just the tip of the iceberg, Madam Speaker. In childcare alone in Nanaimo-North Cowichan, we've invested $35 million so that families have access to affordable quality childcare when they need it. This has put over $15 million back into the pockets of Nanaimo-North Cowichan parents. That's through reduced fees and benefits. And since forming government, we've funded the creation of 681 new licensed care spaces in Nanaimo-North Cowichan. We now have 695 universal childcare spaces in Nanaimo-North Cowichan, meaning families are paying $10 a day or less for those spots. And all parents in the constituency just received at least $550 subsidy for each child in childcare. These are life-changing changes for parents, for families. That, in combination with the single largest middle-class tax break in the history of this province that got rid of the MSP premium, those are changes that are in the order of $20,000 for some of the families I represent. When we go to these childcare space openings, there were parents in tears. Some absolutely couldn't even believe how much this was going to impact their lives, how many things that their children would be experiencing that they would not otherwise be able to experience. In post-secondary education, Madam Speaker, we've invested over $124 million into Vancouver Island University, and that has doubled the amount of student housing on campus. That has replaced the Health and Science Centre. It has expanded the Nanaimo Automotive and Trades Complex. It has increased seats for healthcare training and mental health care training. And it has added 1,400 new seats for on-demand trades. Now, Madam Speaker, these are changes that dwarf anything, and with respect, that was done in the 16 years of previous government in the region that I represent. It is simply an enormous investment in the people of the Mid-Island region. And I know, as I started this speech, I said that credit needs to go where credit is due, and that is to the people of BC. And so I know that these investments, once the people of my own constituency and this province fully embrace and engage in these opportunities, these will answer so much of the demands of our economy and our society at the present time. The skilled labor shortage, healthcare workers shortage. These are the important elements that the Premier has targeted right out of the gate. And I think it goes to really frame and characterize exactly the nature of this government. And that is one of collaboration, partnership, and working in conjunction with communities. And it is an overwhelming focus on getting things done that people need to see done in their communities. And even, Madam Speaker, the challenges of COVID. How were the challenges of COVID addressed? Well, yes, by funding, but not without thought. It wasn't simply, we'll give a tax break to someone and hope that they jump in there and do something. These were targeted investments. And in the case of Nanaimo-North Cowichan, you can look across the water from Nanaimo. You could practically swim across the water from Nanaimo to Gabriel Island, where you have at least, I'm not sure if this is a current statistic or one that goes back a few years, because I go back a few years, Madam Speaker, but it was the community with the most professional artists. It's called the Isle of the Arts. So what did the government invest on Gabriola in order to recover from the effects of COVID? Well, in large measure, in the arts. Individual artists received funding. Arts groups received funding. Theater groups received funding. They are still operating and thriving today because of those investments. And so I know that throne speeches are promises. Throne speeches are in a context. The context includes the past, but the promises are going forward. And in about a week's time, we will hear about a budget that will detail how those promises will be met. And I do know that the constituents I represent have so far seen a government that is committed to them, is committed to change that is real, and committed to investing in the people of the province of British Columbia to build equity in the province of British Columbia. This is something that should be assumed by everyone, but it needs to be stated. And I state it here, that this government is one that's committed to collaboration, partnership, community building, equity, fairness, inclusion, and a sustainable future for all of us. And this throne speech, it lays out the path forward. And I'm excited to be on that path with my colleagues on the government side and my colleagues on the opposition side as we work together in the interests of our constituents and in the interests, as the throne speech pointed out, everyone who calls this beautiful province home. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Member.